That winter, when the wind from the Kenai Mountains cut through flesh like knives, I hobbled step by step across the ice with my cane, believing my daughter would open the door and lead me to her warm kitchen. Instead, the door slammed shut in my face with my son-in-law's cold laughter trailing behind. They didn't know that beneath my rundown wooden shack, the one they called worthless trash, lay a treasure that would bring them all to their knees. And when the time came, I wouldn't need to knock on anyone's door again. They would come looking for me. But it would be too late. My name is Rosalie Walker, and at 72 years old, I've learned that the coldest winds in Alaska don't come from the mountains. They come from the hearts of those who should love you most. That December evening, I'd spent 3 hours preparing for dinner at Martha's house. My daughter had called earlier that week, her voice warm as honey. "Mom, we miss you. Come for dinner Saturday. Carl's grilling salmon, and the kids want to see their grandma." Those words had lit something in my chest I thought had died with my husband 5 years ago. I wrapped the hand-knitted scarves I'd made for my grandchildren in tissue paper, each stitch a prayer for their warmth. The trek from my cabin by the lake to their suburban home usually took 20 minutes, but the ice storm that week had turned every step into a negotiation with gravity. My hip, never quite right since the fall 2 winters back, screamed with each movement. By the time I reached their porch, darkness had settled over Anchorage like a heavy blanket. Through the frosted windows, I could see the golden glow of their dining room, hear the laughter of my grandchildren mixing with the clink of silverware. The smell of grilled salmon and rosemary wafted through the door crack, making my empty stomach clench. I hadn't eaten since breakfast, saving my appetite for this meal. I knocked, my arthritic knuckles barely making a sound against the solid oak. Footsteps approached, heavy ones, Carl's. The door swung open, and there he stood, all 6 feet 2 inches of him, blocking the warmth like a mountain blocks the sun. His eyes, those cold gray eyes that had always reminded me of winter storms, swept over me with the same disgust he might reserve for something scraped off his shoe. "Rosalie," not Mom, not even Mrs. Walker, just Rosalie, spit out like a bitter seed. "Hello? Carl. Martha invited me for dinner." I tried to peer around him, catch a glimpse of my daughter. He didn't move. "Yeah, about that. Martha's not feeling well. Headache. You know how it is." His lips curled into what might have been a smile on a kinder face. On his, it was a sneer. From somewhere deep in the house, I heard Martha's laugh, bright, healthy, very much not suffering from any headache. My heart cracked a little more, a sound I'd grown accustomed to over the years. "I brought gifts for the children," I said, lifting the bag with trembling hands that had nothing to do with the cold. "They don't need any more junk cluttering up their rooms." He glanced at the bag like it contained something contagious. "Besides, we're trying to teach them about quality over quantity. You understand." I understood perfectly. I understood that my handmade gifts would never measure up to the expensive electronics he showered them with. I understood that my presence at their table was no longer welcome. I understood that my daughter, my Martha, who used to curl up in my lap during thunderstorms, had chosen her side. Perhaps I could just say hello. "It's late. Rosalie, the roads are getting worse. You should head back before it gets dangerous." He started to close the door, then paused. "Oh, and next time, maybe call first. Save yourself the trip." The door clicked shut with a finality that echoed in my bones. Through the window, I watched him return to the dining room, watched him say something that made everyone laugh. Martha never even looked toward the door. I stood there for a moment longer, snow beginning to fall again, each flake landing on my coat like a small, cold accusation. The gifts in my bag suddenly felt heavier than boulders. The walk back to my cabin stretched before me like a journey through a wasteland. As I turned away from their warm, bright house, I made myself a promise. This would be the last time I came begging for crumbs of affection from my own family. The last time I stood on their doorstep like a vagrant hoping for charity. They wanted me gone. Fine. I would disappear so completely from their lives that they'd forget I ever existed, but I would remember everything. Every slight, every cruelty, every door slammed in my face. The wind picked up as I made my way back through the darkness. But for the first time in years, I didn't feel its bite. Something else had taken root in my chest, something that burned hotter than any shame or sorrow. They thought they knew me, the weak old woman with her ramshackle cabin and her pathetic gifts. They had no idea what lay beneath the permafrost of my property, what secrets the land held. They had no idea what I was capable of when pushed to the edge of the world. Let them laugh in their warm house. Let them feast on their salmon and their certainty that they'd won. Time was on my side now. Time. And something far more valuable than they could imagine. The seeds of this bitter harvest were planted 7 years ago, the day Martha brought Carl home for the first time. I remember it was a Sunday in July, one of those rare Alaskan summer days when the sun forgot to set and the world seemed dipped in gold. Martha had called ahead, her voice bubbling with excitement. "Mom, I'm bringing someone special. Please make your salmon chowder. He's gonna love you." I'd spent all morning preparing, even dug out my good china, the set my mother had given me for my wedding. When they arrived, Martha practically glowed, her hand tucked into the elbow of a man who looked like he'd stepped out of a magazine. Carl Morrison, tall, broad-shouldered, with perfectly styled hair and a suit that probably cost more than my monthly expenses. "Mrs. Walker," he said, extending a hand. His grip was firm, practiced. "Martha's told me so much about you." But his eyes told a different story. They swept over my modest home, the handmade quilts, the mismatched furniture, the wood stove that had kept me warm for 30 winters, with barely concealed disdain. When I served lunch, he picked at the chowder like he expected to find something unpleasant in it. "So," he said, setting down his spoon after barely 3 bites, "Martha tells me you've lived here alone since Mr. Walker passed. Must be challenging." "I managed just fine," I replied, watching Martha devour her second bowl. At least my daughter still appreciated my cooking. "Still, a woman your age, all alone out here." He glanced around again. "Have you considered something more suitable? There are some excellent assisted living communities in Anchorage." Martha's spoon clattered against her bowl. "Carl," he raised his hands in mock surrender, "I'm just thinking of your mother's safety. Sweetheart, this place looks like it's one strong wind away from collapse. My home, the cabin my husband built with his own hands, where we'd raised Martha, where every beam held a memory, reduced to kindling in his estimation. The rest of the visit passed in strained politeness, but the real blow came 3 months later when they announced their engagement. Carl had proposed at a 5-star restaurant in Seattle, with a ring that caught the light like captured stars. Martha was ecstatic. "We want a June wedding," she gushed over coffee at my kitchen table. "Carl's already started planning. He knows the best venues, the best caterers. Oh, Mom, it's going to be magical." "That sounds wonderful. Honey, what can I do to help?" Martha bit her lip, a gesture I recognized from when she was little and had to ask for something difficult. "Well, actually, Carl had an idea. Since his family is covering the rehearsal dinner and the honeymoon, he thought, maybe you could help with the venue. It's $50,000, but Carl says it's an investment in our future happiness." 50,000. More than I'd ever seen at once. Even when my husband was alive. "Martha, I don't have that kind of money. You know that." Her face fell. "But what about Dad's life insurance? And you own this property outright. You could take out a loan." To put myself in debt for a party? I kept my voice gentle, but firm. "Honey, I can contribute what I can. Maybe 5,000, but 50,000 is impossible." She left that day with tears in her eyes and didn't call for 2 weeks. When she finally did, her voice was cold. "Carl's parents are covering the venue now. They don't want you to worry about it." The message was clear. They'd stepped up where I'd failed. From then on, Carl's campaign against me was subtle but relentless. At family gatherings, he'd mention how his parents had retired to a luxury condo in Florida. "Now that's how you're supposed to spend your golden years," he'd say. never looking at me directly but making sure I heard. When I gave Martha handmade gifts, quilts, preserves from my berry bushes, knitted sweaters, they disappear, replaced by expensive store-bought versions. Carl's allergic to wool, Martha would explain, or Carl prefers store-bought jam, for safety. He painted me as a burden, a relic, someone who stubbornly clung to a dying way of life. And slowly, Martha began to see me through his eyes. My independence became stubbornness. My frugality became stinginess. My love became something to be ashamed of. The wedding invitation, when it finally arrived, assigned me a seat at a back table with distant relatives and plus ones. Carl's parents sat at the head table. I went anyway. I smiled for the photos they grudgingly included me in. I gave a toast that no one listened to. And when Carl's mother asked, loud enough for others to hear, "Is that really what she's wearing?" I pretended not to notice, but I noticed everything. I filed it all away. Each slight an insult. Each moment my daughter chose him over me. I kept my silence, knowing that words would only drive her further into his arms. Let them think me weak. Let them think me defeated. The old know how to wait. And the land keeps its secrets until the time is right. The years after the wedding carved wounds that went deeper than any winter frost. Each rejection was precise, calculated to hurt without leaving visible marks, Carl's specialty, I would later learn. When my first grandchild was born, I found out through a Facebook post, Martha, cradling a tiny bundle, Carl's arm around her shoulders, both beaming at the camera. The caption read, "Welcome to the world, Brandon, already spoiled by Grandma and Grandpa Morrison." I called immediately, my hands shaking. Martha answered on the fifth ring. "Mom? Oh, yes. Brandon was born yesterday. 7 pounds, 3 ounces. Everything went fine. Why didn't you call me? I could have been there." "It all happened so fast," she said. But I could hear Carl's voice in the background, saying something about visiting hours and rest. I wasn't invited to see my grandson until he was 3 weeks old. When I arrived with a hand-knitted blanket that had taken me months to complete, tiny Alaskan animals dancing across soft blue wool, Carl intercepted me at the door. "The baby's sleeping," he said, "and we're trying to keep his environment allergen-free, no handmade items." He held out his hand for the blanket like I was surrendering contraband. Through the window, I could see a nursery filled with expensive gear, toys still in their packaging. On the rocking chair sat a store-bought blanket, tags still attached, for Brandon's first Christmas. I spent weeks crafting a wooden toy chest, sanding it smooth as silk, painting it with non-toxic paint in cheerful colors. Inside, I'd placed wooden toys my husband had carved years ago, saved for future grandchildren. It came back on my porch 2 days after Christmas, with a note in Martha's handwriting. "Mom, this is lovely but doesn't match the nursery. Carl found a perfect one from Pottery Barn. The toys are a choking hazard. Please understand." When my granddaughter Lily arrived 2 years later, the pattern was set. I was the grandmother who existed on the margins, whose gifts were returned, whose presence was tolerated at best. I watched through social media as Carl's parents took my grandchildren to Disney World, to Hawaii, to places I could never afford. In every photo, my daughter smiled, but it never quite reached her eyes. The breaking point came during the blizzard of 2019. January in Alaska had always been harsh, but that storm was something else, a monster that knocked out power lines and buried roads. My generator died on the second day. By the third, with no heat and dwindling food, I knew I needed help. I called Martha. "Honey, I hate to ask, but could Carl come get me? Just until the power comes back." "Mom, you know Carl's back is acting up. He can't be shoveling." "I don't need him to shovel. Just to pick me up. I've already cleared my driveway." I heard muffled conversation. Then Carl's voice came on the line. "Rosalie? Yeah. Look, the roads are pretty bad. The truck's not great in this weather. Have you tried calling emergency services?" "For what? I'm not dying. I just need somewhere warm." "Well, that's what they're for, right? Helping elderly people in situations like this. We've got the kids here, And Martha's worried about bringing any germs or whatever into the house. You understand?" The line went dead. I tried calling back, but no one answered. I survived that blizzard by burning furniture in my wood stove and melting snow for water. My neighbors, the Johnsons, found me on day 5 when they came to check. Mrs. Johnson cried when she saw the state I was in. Mr. Johnson drove me to their house, where I stayed until power was restored. Martha called a week later. "Mom, I'm so glad you're okay. Carl said he told you to call emergency services. Did you not understand?" I wanted to scream, to rage, to tell her exactly what her husband had said. Instead, I heard myself say, "I understood perfectly." There was a pause. What's that supposed to mean? Nothing, honey, nothing at all. But it meant everything. It meant I finally understood that my daughter was lost to me, that Carl had won a war I hadn't even known we were fighting. It meant that the family I'd sacrificed everything for saw me as nothing more than an inconvenience, a problem to be managed from a distance. That night, alone in my cold cabin, I made a decision. If they wanted me gone, I would give them exactly that. I would become the ghost they'd already made me into. No more calls, no more attempts at gifts, no more begging for scraps of affection. But ghosts have a way of haunting those who create them. And some ghosts, given time, become something far more powerful than the living ever expected. The land beneath my cabin had been keeping secrets for millions of years. It could keep mine a little longer. Let them forget about the old woman in the run-down shack by the lake. Let them erase me from their perfect life. Time would tell who truly understood the value of what lay beneath the surface. Sometimes the universe sends you an ally in the most unexpected form. Mine came stumbling through the snow on a February morning, dragging a suitcase and sobbing into a cell phone that had clearly been cut off. I was returning from the grocery store, my ancient truck grinding through the slush. When I saw her, an elderly woman, well-dressed despite her distress, standing outside the Starbucks on Fifth Avenue. Mascara ran down her cheeks in dark rivers. Designer luggage sat in a heap around her feet, already gathering snow. Something about her posture, defeated but trying to maintain dignity, made me pull over. "Ma'am, are you all right?" She looked up, and I nearly gasped. Despite the tears and smeared makeup, I recognized those gray eyes, the same cold gray as Carl's, but filled with pain instead of contempt. I'm fine," she said, the lie obvious in her shaking voice. "Just waiting for someone." "In this weather? Come on, let me at least buy you a coffee while you wait." She hesitated, pride warring with desperation. Desperation won, inside, warming her hands around a cup of tea. The story spilled out. Her name was Elaine Morrison, and she was Carl's mother. 68 years old, and he threw me out like garbage, she whispered. Changed the locks while I was at my doctor's appointment. Had his lawyer, meet me at the door with an eviction notice. But surely he can't just... Oh, he can. The house is in his name. Has been for years. He convinced me it was better for taxes. She laughed bitterly. I believed him. My own son. The story grew worse with each detail. Carl had systematically isolated her from friends, convinced her to sign over her assets, then discarded her the moment she became inconvenient. The final straw? She'd questioned him about some bruises she'd noticed on Martha's arm. He said I was seeing things. Said I was getting senile, making up stories. Her hands trembled around the cup. But I know what I saw. I raised that boy. I know what he's capable of when he's angry. My blood chilled. Bruises? She nodded. Not the first time either, but my daughter-in-law. She makes excuses, says she's clumsy, walks into things, the same things I used to say about his father. We sat in silence for a moment, two old women bound by the same painful thread. Where will you go? I asked finally. I don't know. My sister lives in Oregon, but we haven't spoken in years. Carl made sure of that, said she was toxic, manipulative. I believed him then too. I made a decision that would have seemed insane an hour earlier. Come stay with me. Her eyes widened. I couldn't possibly. I have room. It's nothing fancy, just an old cabin by the lake, but it's warm and paid for. Why would you help me? You don't even know me." I looked her straight in the eye. "I know Carl. I'm Martha's mother." The recognition that dawned on her face was followed quickly by shame. "Oh God, you're Rosalie. He said such terrible things." "I'm sure he has." "All lies, I assume?" She nodded vigorously. "He painted you as this bitter, unstable woman who refused to let Martha grow up, but sitting here, talking to you. You're nothing like he described. Funny how that works." That night, Elaine Morrison moved into my spare room. Over tea and soup, we compared notes, piecing together the full picture of Carl's manipulations. He'd played us against each other, told each of us the other was dangerous, unstable, not to be trusted. He'd isolated Martha from me and Elaine from everyone, creating a world where he was the only voice of authority. "He learned it from his father," Elaine said quietly. "I spent 30 years making excuses for that man. When he died, I thought I was free. Then Carl grew up to be just like him, and I made excuses for him too." Over the following weeks, we developed an unlikely friendship. Elaine was educated, refined in ways I'd never be, but underneath we were the same. Mothers who'd lost children to a manipulator's games. She helped me understand Carl's patterns, his techniques for control. I helped her remember who she was before the men in her life had diminished her. She also had connections I'd never have dreamed of. Despite Carl's attempts to isolate her, Elaine had maintained some friendships from her charity work days, women who knew her worth, who'd wondered why she'd disappeared. "Mary Patterson's husband is a private investigator," she mentioned one evening. "Retired now, but still has contacts, if we wanted to. Document things about Carl." Document things? The bruises on Martha, his financial manipulations, other women he might have hurt. She met my eyes. "My son is dangerous. Rosalie, we both know it. Maybe it's time someone did something about it." For the first time in years, I felt something other than helpless rage. Here was someone who understood, who'd been burned by the same fire, together. We were more than two discarded old women. We were witnesses. We were evidence, and soon we would be so much more. "Yes," I said, reaching across the table to squeeze her hand. "Let's document everything." Outside, the wind howled across the frozen lake, but inside my cabin, for the first time in years, I wasn't alone. The universe had sent me an ally who knew my enemy better than anyone. Carl Morrison had made a critical error. He created two women with nothing left to lose and everything to gain by his downfall. The game had changed, and he didn't even know it yet. The knock on my door came on a Monday morning in March, 3:45 a.m. to be exact. Elaine and I had been living our quiet life for just over a month, documenting Carl's history of abuse, reaching out carefully to Martha through indirect channels. But this knock would change everything. Two men stood on my porch, dressed in heavy coats but carrying themselves with the unmistakable bearing of corporate authority. The older one, gray-haired with sharp blue eyes, extended a hand. "Mrs. Walker? I'm James Fitzgerald from Northern Star Mining Consortium. This is my associate, Dr. Michael Reeves, our head geologist. I apologize for the early hour, but we've just come from Juneau and wanted to catch you before our competitors did." I clutched my robe tighter. "Competitors? I think you have the wrong house." "No, ma'am, we're very much at the right place." He gestured to my property. "We've been conducting aerial surveys of this region for the past 6 months. Your land, specifically the 40 acres around this cabin, shows some very interesting geological signatures." Elaine appeared behind me, equally confused. "What kind of signatures?" "Doctor." Reeves stepped forward, barely containing his excitement. "Mrs. Walker, we have strong reason to believe there's a significant silver deposit beneath your property. Our preliminary estimates suggest it could be one of the largest undiscovered veins in North America." The world tilted slightly. I gripped the door frame. "Silver? Our initial surveys indicate a deposit worth approximately $137 million, possibly more. We'd like to make you an offer for the mineral rights." $137 million. The number hung in the air like a foreign language. I need to think about this. Fitzgerald smiled. Of course. But I should warn you, word is already getting out. By tomorrow, you'll have every mining company in Alaska on your doorstep. We're prepared to make a generous offer now. Tonight, if necessary. I felt Elaine's hand on my shoulder, steady and reassuring. We'll need to see documentation, she said in her most imperious voice, the one that had once commanded charity boards. Surveys, geological reports, proposed contracts. You can't expect Mrs. Walker to make such a decision without proper information. The men exchanged glances. Of course, Fitzgerald said. We have everything in the car. May we come in? For the next 3 hours, my kitchen table became command central for the biggest decision of my life. Maps spread across the worn wood, showing underground rivers of silver spreading beneath land I'd walked for 30 years. Doctor. Reeves explained how the deposit had likely formed millions of years ago, hidden beneath layers of permafrost and rock. The beauty is, he said, pointing to the surveys, we can extract it with minimal surface disruption, a few access points, underground tunneling. Your cabin stays exactly as it is. And the payment? Elaine asked. Ever practical. $50 million upon signing, the remainder paid out over 5 years as we extract, plus a small percentage of anything we find beyond our estimates. I stared at the numbers until they blurred. All those years of Carl mocking my worthless shack, of being dismissed as a poor old woman clinging to nothing. All along, I'd been sitting on a fortune that dwarfed his precious tech job salary. I need a lawyer, I said finally. We'd expect nothing less, Fitzgerald said. Take your time, but not too much time. Like I said, by tomorrow. I understand. After they left, Elaine and I sat in stunned silence. Then, slowly, she began to smile. Rosalie, do you understand what this means? I'm rich. You're powerful. Her eyes gleamed with something I recognized, the same light I'd seen in the mirror lately. Carl values one thing above all else, money and the status it brings. You're about to have more of both than he could ever dream of. Over the next week, I hired the best mineral rights lawyer in Alaska. The contract negotiations were swift but favorable. Northern Star was desperate to lock in the rights before their competitors arrived. I signed on a Thursday afternoon, and by Friday morning, $50 million sat in my account. The first thing I did was stare at the balance for a full hour, certain it was a mistake. The second thing was call my lawyer back. I want to set up a series of shell companies, I told him, completely anonymous, for real estate investments. He didn't ask why. Rich people, apparently, were allowed their eccentricities. Elaine helped with the research. Within days, we knew every piece of property around Martha and Carl's house, who owned it, what they'd paid, how long they'd lived there. Carl had chosen his neighborhood carefully, a prestigious development full of young professionals and established families. Image was everything to him. The Hendersons are getting divorced, Elaine noted, reading from her laptop. House goes on the market next week. Perfect. That's the one directly behind Carl's? And the Johnsons? Already contacted a realtor. They're retiring to Arizona. One by one, I began to buy, not as Rosalie Walker, she was still the poor old woman in the cabin, but as various LLCs with forgettable names, market price, cash offers, quick closings in a seller's market. No one asked questions. What's the plan? Elaine asked one evening as I signed papers for the 6th property. I looked up from the documents. Carl took my family from me by making me worthless in their eyes. He isolated Martha by controlling her environment, who she saw, what she believed. I'm going to return the favor. And then we wait. Carl's ego won't let him live surrounded by empty houses or rentals that don't meet his standards. He'll have to move, and when he does, when he's desperate and frustrated and lashing out, I smiled. That's when he'll make a mistake. Men like Carl always do when they feel their control slipping. Elaine raised her teacup. To the long game. To justice, I corrected. Outside. Spring was coming to Alaska. The ice was breaking up on the lake, revealing the dark water beneath. Change was in the air, carried on winds that whispered of endings and beginnings. Carl Morrison thought he'd buried me. He had no idea he'd merely planted a seed, and harvest season was coming. Within 3 months, I owned every house on Carl's street except his. The acquisitions had been surgical, methodical, a cash offer here, a quick closing there. My shell companies had innocent names. Northwind Properties, Aurora Investments, Glacier Holdings, nothing that would trace back to the old woman in the cabin by the lake. But owning the properties was only half the strategy. The other half required Elaine's connections and the careful documentation we'd been building. Mary Patterson's husband came through, Elaine said one morning, sliding a manila folder across my kitchen table. These are from the hospital records. I opened it carefully. Inside were photographs and medical reports spanning 5 years. Martha had visited the emergency room 8 times. Broken ribs from falling down stairs. A fractured wrist from slipping on ice. Bruises from walking into doors. The patterns were clear to anyone who wanted to see them. There's more. Elaine continued. 3 of Carl's ex-girlfriends, Tom tracked them down. They all have similar stories. One has a restraining order from California that Carl somehow got expunged. My hands shook as I studied the evidence. Why didn't Martha tell me? Why didn't I see it in Carl's father? Elaine countered gently. These men are experts at making us doubt ourselves, at making their victims feel responsible. Martha probably believes it's her fault. The next phase required delicacy. I couldn't approach Martha directly. Carl monitored her communications. But I could create circumstances that would force the truth into the light. I started with the Hendersons' house, directly behind Carl's. Instead of leaving it empty, I rented it to a women's shelter as a transitional home for domestic abuse survivors. The director, Sarah Clement, was a force of nature who'd survived her own nightmare. We'll be discreet, she assured me, but visible. Sometimes seeing others escape is what gives victims the courage to run. Next came the Johnsons' place. I donated it to a nonprofit that provided legal services for abuse victims. Within weeks, lawyers were coming and going, their cars bearing subtle decals. You are not alone, and breaking the silence. Carl noticed. Of course. Elaine heard through her grapevine that he'd been complaining at his country club about the declining neighborhood. His property value was suffering. He said, the wrong element was moving in. Good, I thought. Let him squirm. The pressure mounted slowly. I had the empty houses maintained but not occupied, creating an eerie sense of abandonment around Carl's perfect home. Security cameras were installed, all legally positioned but clearly visible. A private security firm made regular rounds, retired police officers who recognized the signs of domestic abuse and kept careful logs. Then came the breakthrough we'd been waiting for. It was a Thursday evening in June. Elaine and I were reviewing financial statements when her phone rang. Mary Patterson's voice was urgent. There's been an incident. Martha's at the hospital. Carl was arrested. We rushed to Alaska Regional, my old truck pushing its limits. In the emergency room, we found Martha sitting alone, her left arm in a sling, a purple bruise blooming across her cheekbone. She looked up when we entered, and for a moment, I saw my daughter again. Lost, frightened, desperately needing her mother. Mom? Her voice cracked. How did you... Shh, I said, pulling her against me carefully, mindful of her injuries. I'm here now. The story came out in pieces. Carl had discovered the domestic violence legal center behind their house. He'd gone into a rage, accusing Martha of contacting them, of planning to leave him. When she'd denied it, he'd pushed her down the stairs. But this time, Martha whispered. The lawyers next door heard everything. They called 911. They had recordings from their security cameras. Carl had been arrested on assault charges, this time, with multiple witnesses and video evidence. He couldn't talk his way out. I'm scared, Mom, Martha admitted. He'll get out on bail. He'll come after me. He said if I ever tried to leave, he won't touch you again. I promised. You're coming home with me. For the first time in years, Martha came to my cabin. Her eyes widened when she saw Elaine. Mrs. Morrison. But Carl said you were dead in a nursing home? No, dear. Just another woman he discarded when I became inconvenient. That night, as Martha slept in the room that had once been hers, Elaine and I finalized our plans. Carl would make bail, but he'd return to a neighborhood that had transformed into a fortress of watchful eyes and support systems. Every move would be documented, every threat recorded. The district attorney is a friend of Mary's, Elaine said quietly. With our evidence and the current charges, Carl's looking at serious time. But prison wasn't enough, not for what he'd stolen from us. Tomorrow, I said. Martha and I are going to have a conversation about property values, about how the neighborhood has changed, about how maybe it's time for her to start fresh somewhere else. And Carl's house? I smiled grimly. Oh, I have special plans for that. Did you know the women's shelter is looking to expand? They need a main facility, something prominent, visible, a symbol that survivors can reclaim their lives. Elaine matched my smile. Carl's going to hate that. Yes, I agreed. He is. Outside, the midnight sun painted the sky in shades of gold and pink. Alaska in summer was a land of endless light, where darkness couldn't find purchase. It seemed fitting. After so many years in shadow, we were finally stepping into the light, and we were just getting started. Carl made bail after 3 days, just as we'd expected. What he didn't expect was to return to a neighborhood that had become his personal nightmare. Every house on his street now bore subtle signs of my ownership, new security systems, fresh landscaping, and most damning of all, the constant presence of women who refused to be intimidated. But Carl was nothing if not predictable. Cornered animals always lash out. The call came at 2:15 a.m. on a December night, 2 weeks after his trial had been postponed for the 3rd time. His lawyer was building a defense around stress and misunderstandings, painting Martha as unstable, influenced by bitter relatives. It was working. Without Martha's testimony, the case was weakening. Rosalie? Martha's voice was barely a whisper. He's here. My blood froze. Where? Outside, in the woods. I saw him from the window. He's watching the cabin. Carl had jumped bail. Desperate men do desperate things. Wake Elaine, I said, already reaching for the rifle by the door. Call 911. Lock yourselves in the back bedroom. Mom, no. Do it now. I'd lived through Alaskan winters for 40 years. I knew how to move through snow silently, how to use darkness as an ally. What Carl didn't know was that I'd been expecting this, hoping for it, even because attempted violation of a restraining order while out on bail, that would end his games permanently. I slipped out the back door, circling wide through the trees I knew like old friends. The snow muffled my footsteps as I moved into position. There, a shadow among shadows, creeping toward my cabin. He carried something in his hand. In the moonlight, I caught the glint of metal, a knife. I raised my rifle, not to shoot, but to be ready. That's far enough, Carl. He spun around, his face a mask of rage in the pale light. This is all you're doing, isn't it? Turning my mother against me, filling Martha's head with lies. The only liar here is you. I kept the rifle steady. Drop the knife. Or what? You'll shoot me? He laughed, ugly and desperate. Go ahead, then Martha will see what you really are, a killer. I don't need to kill you. Carl, you're doing a fine job destroying yourself. You ruined everything. He took a step closer. The neighborhood, my reputation, my marriage. You ruined your marriage the first time you raised a hand to my daughter. I just made sure everyone could see what you really are. His face contorted. Martha belongs to me. When I'm done with you and my interfering mother, she'll remember that. The admission hung in the air like a confession. Beautiful. Did you get that, officers? I called out. Carl froze as flashlights suddenly blazed from 3 directions. Alaska State troopers emerged from positions around the cabin. Weapons drawn. They'd been waiting since Martha's call, recording everything. Carl Morrison, drop the weapon and get on the ground. For a moment, I thought he might charge anyway. Rage and desperation warred on his face. Then, slowly, the knife fell into the snow. He dropped to his knees, still staring at me with those cold gray eyes. You set me up. No, I said quietly. You set yourself up the day you decided my daughter was property. I just made sure you'd face consequences. As they cuffed him, Carl snarled one last threat. This isn't over. I'll get out. And when I do— When you get out, I interrupted, you'll find your house has been sold. Did Martha mention? She's putting it on the market tomorrow. Remarkable how quick divorce proceedings move when there's attempted murder charges. Your assets will be frozen, your reputation destroyed. You'll have nothing. My house. We'll make a wonderful expansion for the women's shelter. They're very excited about it. Full circle. Don't you think? The place where you terrorized my daughter, becoming a sanctuary for women escaping men like you. The officers dragged him away, his curses echoing through the trees until the patrol cars disappeared into the night. I stood there for a moment, letting the silence settle back over my land. Inside. I found Martha and Elaine huddled together, both crying. It's over, I said, setting the rifle down. He's gone. Martha flew into my arms. I was so scared. When I saw him out there, I thought, I know, baby, but he can't hurt you anymore. And this time, he threatened all of us on tape while violating bail. No judge will let him walk. Elaine smiled through her tears. You planned this. You knew he'd come. I hoped he would. Men like Carl can't stand losing control. It makes them reckless. I stroked Martha's hair. The security team has been watching the cabin for weeks. The moment he stepped onto the property, they alerted the troopers. We were never in real danger. You protected us, Martha whispered. Even after everything I did, how I treated you. You're my daughter. That never changed, no matter what he made you believe. We spent the rest of the night together. 3 generations of women who'd survived Carl Morrison. As dawn broke over the mountains, painting the snow pink and gold, I felt something shift in the air. The shadow that had hung over our family was finally lifting. Carl would go to prison for a long time. Attempted murder, violation of bail, criminal threatening. His reign of terror was over. Martha was free. Elaine was free. We all were. But there was still one more card to play. One final twist of the knife to ensure Carl understood the full scope of his defeat. And it would come from the most unexpected source of all. The morning after Carl's arrest, I stood in the office of Ridgewater Development, the premier real estate firm in Anchorage. Martha sat beside me, still fragile but growing stronger. Across the desk, Thomas Ridgewater himself reviewed the paperwork with barely concealed excitement. Mrs. Walker, this is quite remarkable. You own every property on Willowbrook Drive except my daughter's house, which goes on the market today. I slid the listing agreement across. I'm prepared to purchase it immediately. Cash offer, 20% above asking. His eyes widened. The entire street, that's— What are your plans? Redevelopment, the neighborhood needs updating. New construction, modern amenities, a complete transformation. What I didn't tell him was that the transformation had already been designed. A campus for survivors, transitional housing, legal services, counseling centers, childcare. Carl's perfect suburban kingdom would become a beacon of hope for women escaping men just like him. Mom, Martha said softly as we left the office, I never asked. How can you afford all this? I'd been waiting for this moment. Remember how Carl always mocked my worthless shack? How he said I was too proud to admit I had nothing? She nodded, shame coloring her features. There's a silver mine under that shack, worth approximately $137 million. Martha stopped walking. What? I've known for months. While Carl was scheming to push me out of your life, I was quietly becoming wealthier than he could ever imagine. But why didn't you tell me? Because I needed him to keep underestimating me. Men like Carl make mistakes when they think they're punching down. I took her hand. Besides, the money wasn't the revenge. Watching him realize that the woman he'd dismissed as worthless had the power to dismantle his entire life, that was the revenge. The news of Carl's arrest and the neighborhood transformation made headlines. Local woman transforms suburban street into haven for abuse survivors. The story caught fire when reporters discovered the mining rights angle. Suddenly, Everyone wanted to know about the grandmother who'd played the long game. Carl heard about it in prison, of course. Elaine made sure of that, sending him newspaper clippings with a simple note. "You taught me to be cruel. Consider this graduate-level work. Love, Mom." The trial was swift, with video evidence, multiple witnesses, and his recorded threats. Carl received 15 years, no possibility of early release. As they led him away, he turned to look at us, Martha, Elaine, and me, standing together. The hatred in his eyes could have frozen hell. But we were done being afraid of him. 6 months later, the Willowbrook Women's Center officially opened. The ribbon-cutting ceremony drew hundreds, including many women who'd found the courage to leave their own abusers. Martha spoke publicly for the first time about her experience. "I once believed I deserved what happened to me," she said, voice steady despite her tears. "But standing here, in what used to be my prison, watching it become a place of freedom, I finally understand. The shame was never mine to carry." I stood with Elaine, both of us watching Martha reclaim her narrative. My daughter was back. Not the same, none of us were, but stronger. Forged in winter's cold and reborn in spring's promise. That night, I returned to my cabin by the lake. The mining company had begun preliminary work, but true to their word, my home remained untouched. I sat on the porch my husband had built, watching the sun set over the water. Elaine joined me, 2 cups of tea in her hands. Any regrets? None. I accepted the tea gratefully. "You?" "Just one. I wish I'd thrown him out sooner." She smiled. "But then I wouldn't have met you. Wouldn't have learned that revenge is best served by old women with nothing left to lose. And everything to gain," I added. We sat in comfortable silence. 2 mothers who'd refused to be erased, somewhere in a concrete cell. Carl Morrison was learning what it meant to be powerless. Somewhere in Anchorage, women were finding safety in the house where he'd once ruled through fear, and here, in a cabin he'd dismissed as worthless. 2 old women sipped tea and watched the stars emerge over Alaska's endless sky. I told him that night on my porch they would come looking for me, but it would be too late. I'd been right. Just not in the way any of us expected. He'd come looking for revenge and found justice instead. Martha had come looking for her mother and found her strength. Elaine had come looking for shelter and found a sister. As for me, I'd spent years looking for a way to fight back against someone who'd stolen my family. Turns out, all I'd needed was patience, the right allies, and a fortune hidden beneath my feet. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying the scent of pine and possibility. I closed my eyes and smiled. Let them all know you can lock out an old woman, mock her gifts, steal her daughter, and laugh at her tears. But be careful which doors you close. Sometimes, the very ground you stand on belongs to the one you scorned, and sometimes, that's exactly what she's been counting on. I stood up, bones creaking but spirit soaring, and went inside. Behind me, I pulled the door shut with a quiet click, not in anger or fear, but in peace. This time, I was the one deciding who stayed outside in the cold. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Please share in the comments below so we can connect. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts. Your experiences and perspectives mean the world to me.